So let's all get started then. Divyesh, do you want to give a prelude to this next tutorial?
Yeah, sure. Yesterday you learned the creating 2D channel geometry. That was just a very simple mesh, a 2D single block mesh. Uh, in the multi-block mesh, you will learn how you can create a geometry with more than one block. Other than that, how you can do refinement at few area. For example, at top and bottom, you want to give a refinement. How you can do that using uh, the grading feature in Blockmetric file. So this is just a advanced tutorial of the previous tutorial, which is creating 2D channel geometry. So from this, you will understand how you can go with more than one block. You can start the tutorial. Meanwhile, we'll answer your question in forum and chat window.
It looks like some people are saying that they couldn't hear Divyesh. Uh, Divyesh, just quickly gave an overview of what you had done yesterday and what you guys should be working on right now. So you can please get started with the spoken tutorial number 5, which is multi-block meshing of a 2D geometry in OpenFOAM. I hope I was audible to everyone.
Yes, ma'am.
Hello.
Divyesh, are you something?
Hello. Am I audible?
And now you're audible, but were you trying to say something all this while?
Yeah, so I think some of them have missed last talk. So yesterday we tried these two tutorial number 3 and tutorial number 4. So today we will start with tutorial number 5, which is multi-block meshing. Multi-block meshing is a slight advanced tutorial of the previous tutorial, which is creating a 2D channel geometry. So in this multi-block meshing, you will learn how you can create more than one block in your Blockmetric file. Also, you will learn how to give refinement at some walls. For example, at the top and bottom walls, you want to give a very fine mesh, and at the center part, you want a coarser mesh. So that tutorial, those things you will learn in this tutorial number 5.
And if you have any questions on that, please post it on the spoken tutorial forums.
Madam, I'm sorry that my installation is completed by now only. Hello.
Yes.
It is asked to do the multi-block meshing of 2D geometry in OpenFOAM now. How should I do on it?
Okay, I'll answer you on the chat window. Just hold for that.
Okay.
Please post your questions on the chat window so that people who are following the videos will not get disturbed.
Hello, there's just a small query. If anyone's using OpenFOAM on macOS, if you can just reply on chat box, it would be good.
Hello everyone. So those of you who have been working on the multi-block meshing of 2D geometry in OpenFOAM, I hope you are through with this tutorial. If you are, then you may just post yes in the chat window. Okay, that's great. So I see that many of you are through with it. We do have a few questions that came through. One of it is, Divyesh or Ashley, you may please answer this. When we divide the geometry into 2 blocks, are we creating a physical surface between the 2 blocks?
No, in this case, we are not creating any physical surface. But yes, if you want to do in any other case, you can do that. But here we are not doing that.
Okay, the other question was that why is XY plane selected for the numbering this time, whereas it was XZ plane in the previous one?
Sorry, can you repeat? Actually, I didn't catch that.
So why was the plane that was selected in this tutorial XY, whereas it was XZ in the previous tutorial?
Ashley, can you answer this question?
Okay,
So I still didn't get the question because I'm sure in both the cases we used the same uh, coordinate system to number it. So are you asking about numbering the vertices in the vertex section, or how the blocks are, vertices are ordered in the block section? Can you just clarify that?
Yeah, that's what I thought. The previous was also XY. So this is something that was posted on the forum. So I thought this may be. So whoever posted this question, could you please clarify what exactly you were looking to get answered?
You can just briefly let us know. You can even put that in the chat window if you want.
Right.
Hello, Asle sir.
Yes.
Sir, as you replied in my forum question, like .text downloaded things.
Okay. Yeah. So you
Sir,
can. Yes.
Sir, I downloaded a few things. I'm not getting. Sir, once I will share my screen, I will show.
Okay. Sure.
I think I'm not able to share.
Is this something we can help with later, Ashley? Because there was also a question on the current number that Professor Janani would like to address.
Okay.
Isn't it like a technical question? Can you read out that question again? Sorry, I missed that.
Sure, ma'am. Sure. So I don't remember. I think it was Venkatesh who asked. So Venkatesh, you can just post your screenshot. I'll guide you from there in the chat box.
Okay, sir.
So at this point, Professor Janani, you could please answer the question on the current number. The other thing is, if there are any physics-based question that you would have, please post it also on the chat box, and I'm sure Professor Janani would answer that for you.
Okay, so we had a question with regard to the Courant number, and I think this is a very fundamental aspect of trying to understand the setting of the time step for your simulations. It is with regard to your transient simulation. So what does Courant number mean? Let me just share my screen to just write out. Just give me a second. Okay, so the main idea behind the Courant number is that, so you're able to see the Courant number?
Yeah, we can see the screen, but we can't see that particular slide. At least I'm not able to.
Okay, let me do this. Is it visible now? The slide at least?
Yes, yes, it is.
Okay. So I'm sorry about this because my iPad doesn't seem to work at the last minute. But so I think the idea pretty much is can be explained over here. So the issue with maybe a mesh, right? Like the mesh that you see over here, is that you are trying to simulate flow happening through the mesh, right? So if you do have a series of cells, one connecting to the other, what you are simulating is the movement of flux through the walls of the cells, which is your convection and diffusion. Now, if you have a velocity which is making this movement possible, and this is temporally changing, by temporally changing meaning every time step there is one movement of whatever quantity that you're trying to transport using a particular velocity. So then it becomes imperative that you track this movement accurately. One way to visualize this tracking is, see if you're standing in your house looking out of the window, right? And you're blinking your eyes, right? So if you see a bird start to enter your line of sight or your vision, at which point you close your eyes for a very long time and then you open it, right? The bird would have flown past and you cannot track its trajectory. It could have come and sat on the balcony and then left, but you wouldn't know, correct? So it is appropriate practice that you take a snapshot or blink your eye at a particular pace so that you're able to see the bird's trajectory at every movement that it makes. The Courant number is one such number which says do a time step. In this case, the blinking. A time step means it will generate some data at every time step, how much movement has happened. And what you're trying to tell the code is that your time step should be only just enough so that the movement of velocity happens across one grid cell. Okay, so you might have 100 cells along one line, but the velocity should be, if the velocity is say u, the time step should be such that the movement just happens from one cell to the next cell and nothing more. If you start giving long time steps, then it will have moved say 10 cells and that much more approximation happens. So your Courant number basically is a measure of how much you should allow your solution to progress in time. Typically, the advised value is 1 or lesser than 1. Okay, so if you have a velocity of 1 or lesser than 1, then you are ensuring that the movement of the fluid, the movement of the information is lesser than one cell distance or maximum equal to the next cell distance. Does that make sense? Are there any questions related to this?
But madam, how can we control this? Because if you are going for unstructured mesh, the delta X or the space discretization will not be in our control, no?
Okay, that's a good question. So now typically what you will have to ensure is, so if you have an unstructured grid, it will tell you the mesh typically will tell you the minimum distance between the adjacent cells, minimum normal distance. Okay, so if you are able to access that value, it is prudent to keep the distance to be this minimum distance and calculate a t which will satisfy that. Does that make sense?
Yes, madam. But when unstructured mesh is made, the software selects the mesh size, no? Because
but towards the end, after the meshing, it would print an output on the screen.
Yeah.
And in that screen, that information would be there. So it is,
okay.
It is important for you to just skim through that and understand. So it's a little trial and error process, because like you point out, for unstructured, this is not known information, right? But printing would give you a minimum cell distance, minimum cell size, and that can be used as a scale to estimate.
Ma'am, how to choose the
and further when grid adaptation is done, we will do for capturing various properties now, madam.
Yes.
In that case, even we don't have any control on it, on the grid size.
You have to go for adaptive time stepping, wherein the code will itself do an adaptive time stepping. So when you're doing adaptive grid, where the grid is also changing, you'll have to adopt an adaptive time stepping.
Oh, okay.
Ma'am, how to choose the time step based on physical aspect, I mean physics perspective?
Okay, so typically when you have, so there is a large difference between how you would do it for, say, a very fast moving flow versus a very slow moving flow. And also for multi-phase flow, it has a different behavior. So you will have to make, for example, for multi-phase flow, you will have these superficial velocities, meaning the velocity is relative. You have movement of two fluids happening together next to each other, and they move at a particular velocity. But superficial velocity means you presume one phase only fills the entire domain and it moves with that velocity. So you will know a rough estimate of your flow field, right? And your delta T, meaning your delta T should not, So for example, you should choose your delta x based on the delta t you can afford. Most of these times, it will be time constraint with regard to meshing and simulation. So you can't have saying that I need a really refined mesh and hence I will have a time step of 10 power minus 10. Then you're running a simulation for maybe 1 month, which is not practical. So you will have to do an optimization in the sense, how many days can I afford? And hence, what can my delta x be based on the velocity that I roughly know the flow will have, if you understand. So now that velocity which is critical for you, you have to make a choice based on, for example, if I have just a bubble rising through a liquid, then the bubble velocity is important for me if I'm tracking that bubble. If, for example, I have several different bubbles moving, but I need to capture that bubble right next to the wall, which is moving very fast and up, I'll only think about that velocity near that bubble, right? So it really depends on the simulation that you're solving and also the computational constraints that you have, that you will have to decide the refinement and the time step. Okay, so the effect of, there are some questions with regard to, I think Himanshu is asking, it is best practice to make a rough Courant number calculation before starting the simulation. But after you start the simulation, you see the velocity flow field, it is imperative that you go back and check if your estimates fall within the range. Okay.
Okay, ma'am.
The Courant number is used for a transient case. It doesn't really matter in a steady state simulation, because steady state means for my current, I mean, there is no time. It is just that the simulation, the flow field is going to remain in that movement forever and ever. So there's no time step actually involved. So it is for the transient case. Okay, it does not have some same structure as inlet, metal, and so in that case, how should I define the geometry of the bone? Okay, is that a Courant number question? I don't think so. That probably is a meshing question.
Ma'am, one more doubt, madam. That velocity time also is involved in it. No, you mentioned about getting the velocity, cell velocity, which may not be the velocity that we give at the inlet or as the boundary condition.
Absolutely. That is why I said it would be a rough estimate in the first time around. You would go back into your flow field and check whether the velocities in certain, almost all locations, fall within this range. For example, you will have to output Umax and Umin, and you would have to see where the maximum velocity is and see if your Courant number adheres to that.
Oh, okay, ma'am.
Yeah. What is local time stepping? Are you talking about adaptive time stepping?
Yes, ma'am. There is a concept in OpenFOAM regarding the LTS, local time stepping, to accelerate the time calculation in a transient situation. I mean, to get a steady state solution easily without having much computational effort, we adapt local time stepping. I think
you are meaning the pseudo time stepping. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so what pseudo, at least I do know what pseudo time stepping is. Pseudo time stepping is wherein you are, like you say, there is a steady state simulation and you want to increase the convergence of that. So that's more or less a more numerical technique which will presume smaller iterations, closer iterations for faster convergence. So I think let's not get into that because we have not done a rigorous course on CFD for now. And I hope I should go and check actually what this local time stepping is as far as OpenFOAM is concerned. No, so maybe in the afternoon I can clarify whether the pseudo time stepping is indeed the local time stepping.
Okay, ma'am.
What is
And madam, a fundamental question, how will I know if my current number chosen is not correct? How can I, is it that the solution will diverge or?
Not necessarily. See, typically there are various ways of seeing it. Your Courant number, if it goes beyond 1, is a very danger mark position. Though there is one solver which will give you some flexibility for complex problems to go slightly beyond 1 and still not diverge. So first, the Courant number in your domain, the maximum Courant number in your domain has to be monitored. Second, and it is not necessary that things have to diverge. The problem is you will have to check for the physics of the flow. It might be as simple as just under predicting some value. The solver is not predicting the correct values. Your residuals might be high. Divergence is obviously an indicator, but many times this does not happen. And students presume that their simulations are right. So it's very important for you to identify a validation-based study wherein you're sure that in a model close to what you do, or in a flow field close to what you do, with velocities similar to those regions, what is the physicality or the range of values being observed? If there is a deviation from an expected range, then you can make an estimate. This is for very complex conditions, which I presume what you're asking for. For very standard conditions, you typically have standardized validation studies which you can validate against. What is affected if Courant number is greater than 1? I think I just answered that question. So you will not get a big sign and say that, oh my God, it's wrong. The errors are subtle and it is very difficult to pick up those errors. So the only way to see it is comparing to a study closest to what you do, an experimental study closest to what you do, at least see if the trends are being matched. Typically there's significant under prediction, and in places where you're close to flow reversal, there might be a flow reversal that's observed, so on and so forth. So it's very much case dependent how this error is going to manifest. Should we manually calculate the Courant number and input it? No. Typically the Courant number, you obviously have to manually calculate it only to decide on what your time step should be or your mesh size should be, based on whichever is a more stringent constraint. If you have a very small computer at hand, obviously the time step becomes a constraint, and you'll have to choose a mesh size to satisfy the this. But if you choose too much of a big mesh size for too complicated a problem, it's going to diverge. It won't give you a proper answer. You need a specific amount of refined mesh for certain complex problems. So a rough calculation, yes, but not as Courant number, but keeping 1 as a maximum value. Can I decide on what delta t or delta x to use? And then the solver, as it is printing, will print out the Courant number that it sees for every cell, like the maximum or the minimum Courant number. So that must be in the range of what you calculated. Right. So the software only calculates the number. It's a reflection of the delta t and the delta x that you have input. So it is not going to change the Courant number. Of course, this is not the case for adaptive time stepping. If you're doing adaptive time stepping, it will have an inherent Courant number check, and it will change the delta t, not the mesh. Adaptive meshing techniques will change the mesh, but then you'll have to hook it on with adaptive time stepping to see if both are in phase. Okay, is there any further questions in this regard?
So I'm sure there will be many more questions, and I know that people are enjoying it. Professor Janini's lectures are always awesome, and believe me, there is more to come. She will be giving a lecture later today. But I think for now, maybe we should move on to the next spoken tutorial, so that once we are done, we can then get on to the lecture, and Professor Jani can answer a lot more questions at that point. So shall we all move on to the 6th tutorial, which would be creating 3D pipe geometry and mesh in OpenFOAM. Just like all the previous tutorials, please play it, watch it, and learn it side by side. Post your questions on the forum. I will be picking up questions from the forum also over here for discussion. And after that, we have the lecture from by Professor Janani. It'll be on laminar and turbulent flow, and also a short lecture on multi-phase flows. There will be a small talk and a demonstration. So please get started with spoken tutorial number 6. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Janani.